Welcome again to Chronically Empowered. And today I'm super excited to have Michelle Irving. I've been waiting so long to finally have this chat with you. And welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. It's same. I've really been looking forward to connecting together.
Super excited. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Michelle. I work with anybody navigating their career while living with chronic illness. I run a global business. About 75% of my clients are based in the US. And I've lived with chronic illness in a diagnosed way since I was 35 and I'm now 53. So I've done it throughout the whole of my career. And I would have to say that now in my 50s, I'm probably having the time of my life, both working, living, and also in pretty good health.
This is actually very encouraging because I feel that many of us, people suffering from chronic illness, we have this different kind of FOMO. Is
Yeah.
just this feeling that we missed out on life, like those years being bedridden or home-ridden. And I'm hearing more and more from very empowered people like yourself that kind of life can start or be more meaningful at any age. It's very encouraging to me.
Yeah, I think that we're taught when we have chronic conditions that life will begin when you get better. And then we're sort of struggling to try and feel better or do better or be better, which is exhausting on top of a chronic condition. And I think mostly, yes, there's always a physical component, but there's a lot of mental and emotional pressure that is exhausting most of us. And it's actually about learning how to navigate that component of our experience, both ourselves, but also with family, with friends, with clinicians, with colleagues, just that part of the experience. If you can get the skills to work out how to do life in a way that works for you, then things can dramatically shift in your sense of well-being regardless of what happens.
This is super interesting. Can you expand a bit more on that?
Sure. So I think one of the things is that we have a really totally ridiculous story of illness in culture. So, wellness is seen as a virtue, and it's all about being well in our culture, despite the facts that we're humans and we're made of biological material, which is designed to break down. And some of us have that experience early in some ways. And we're told that it's really over, that there aren't any dreams, that when you feel better, then things
Yeah.
can begin. And that adds an extremely problematic emotional system for us because we give up hope. We spend a lot of time performing wellness for others or trying to prove that we're trying to get well. And we really attack chronic illness the same way we would, in most of our cases, attack work. Just push, 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 push. So that layers into us an enormous amount of internal and external pressure that we're contending with every moment of every day. When we have a story of illness, which is this is part of my experience and this is what works for me in my body. This is the timing that works. These are my natural gifts. This is where my energy genuinely is. This is what lights me up. This is what exhausts me. This is what drains me. When we have a real clarity about that and we tune into what helps, and my number one question is, what helps here? Exactly where I am. What helps here? When that's the question, then you're getting much more interesting data, much more emotional empowerment, and then things become more possible through that reorientation. But these are very, very deep questions to have with yourself.
This is very insightful. And also, I really like your calm demeanor because it's refreshing, you know. Firstly, in our profession, sometimes you feel you need to kind of shout to be heard. So I really like the way you're presenting this very delicate subject. And I think that the mental strain is something that is rarely been talked about. You know, the common conversation I have with people who are struggling is that kind of prince waiting to be rescued. You know, this is what I hear from people, or
Yeah.
princess.
Yeah.
Um, and I rarely see responsibility taken. And even when I do, it's usually very, very on point of something that is more, I will get this referral or
Yes.
I will get this medication. But if you use the same energy, which is important, of course, the health navigation part is
Yeah.
important, but if you channel the same amount of energy in working on a way out, as we speak, I think it might be beneficial for you. I wouldn't say more, you know, it's very delicate to kind of blame people for wanting to get better in the traditional medical way because this is what we all do. I'm taking medication.
Yeah. I'm taking
I'm relying.
medication.
I'm completely, you know, a big advocate for the fact that you should firstly receive medical advice and act upon it and be
100%.
critical, of course, and use supplementary and complementary medicine. But eventually, this dedication that my peers have for leveling up, kind of, in their medical journey, and I'm saying medical journey, not health journey, intentionally. I will get this. Okay, now I get this medication. Oh, now I got
Yeah.
this treatment. And I wonder if, in your opinion, is there a better way to channel those very, very limited amounts of energy?
So I think it's not about what we do with it. I think it's about how we do it. And so I'll give you the example. Uh, I was given medication very early. I have an autoimmune condition of my liver. And what that means is that I was diagnosed very early and it was treated with the inflammation, it was treated with steroids. That knocked me out and I slept 18 hours a day at 35. And I was like, this is not on. So we tried a number of different medications. In the end, if I didn't take medication, the prognosis was within 5 years, this would be irreversible, organ failure, dying. That's where it was going. And I was really looking at where I was and saying, well, without medication, I've got 5 years of good health and I'll take it because that the quality is not appropriate. But I stayed under medical assessment. I didn't opt out completely. I made an agreement with my clinician to be monitored. And the number one thing I see about clinicians in my self for me and that I share and teach is they are the advisors. Now, when they came to a point where they said, you really have to take medication and you don't leave the hospital without it, I knew that that was the point that I would take medication. And then what happened for me was in those 5 years, and it ended up being 7, new medication came on the market. And that was it. I'm on the same medication then as I am now. I'm extraordinarily robust. Yes, my immune system's suppressed. Yes, if I get a cold or I get the flu, I'm down for much longer. No one can come see me if they've got a cold. That's an absolute no. But overall, the medical team for me is the advisor and I'm still the decision maker. And so that's how I'm using the energy from this place of what I think of as sovereignty. And this is my life. It is my life. And I do get to choose and make choices about it.
This is really on point. You are the decision maker, and you have a list of advisors. You know, in extreme cases, I call it that you're kind of a consumer in a supermarket and you pick up what you need to get better. But I think this is the extreme form of it, because some people are remain undiagnosed for years.
Exactly.
Um,
And so you're not getting great advice, but the advice that you're getting is that there's no advice yet available for you. And so then what do? You're still there with you. So you're still making
yeah,
decisions about you and what you're going to do, even in that situation.
yeah, and I think this is where frustration builds the
Yeah.
most, and I think these friction points also create the most effect on mental health.
Yes.
I think that we are, of course, not trained, and this is another topic maybe, but we're not trained to deal with decision making. Sometimes, school doesn't prepare us for decision making in
Yeah.
life in general, let alone within the medical realm. But when we're faced with diagnosis, I think that there is a feeling of
Yeah.
lostness, kind of,
Yeah.
that right. We're just out there in the wilds, and we say, okay, like, is that it?
Yeah.
Now I am the person who has to do everything by
Do
myself.
deal with this? Yeah. So this is
Yeah.
great. So what I did for myself in this quite long process is I designed what I call the emotional map for chronic illness because I needed an emotional map, right? There's the physical process, but emotionally, this is tough. Like, this is really hardcore emotional experience. And so I just started asking myself at various points, where do I feel? Like, what's the vision? What do I feel like I am? And the place that you're talking about is, I call it's out at sea. I'm in a little boat. I don't know what's going to happen. I can only see water and I can't see land. And that's an emotional stage as much as a treatment stage. And in that stage, my only job is to take care of myself in the boat. I can't swim to shore because I can't even see land. So this is undiagnosed, this is flares, this is symptoms. And we think that when we're in that boat, we often confuse it and think our job in that boat is to work out the rest of our life. What am I doing about my career? What am I doing about, all of my lifelong finances until I'm 70? What am I doing about all my creativity and all my hopes and dreams? And we confuse being in the boat with, I have to make decisions about everything from this place in the boat. There are three other additional stages emotionally to the boat, and I'm happy to walk us through them, but I'm curious. So there are four stages to the emotional app. The first is the being at sea and being in the boat. Don't know what's happening, only job, be in the boat. Eventually, whether you get treatment, whether you get diagnosis, there is a point where you sort of get the hang of how things are, and you can see this is going to go on for a little while. And at that point, I say, you wash up on the beach. You've got a bit of a handle, even if you're in bed most of the time, you've got a handle on sort of the rhythm of how this goes. For some people, we'll get treatment, we'll get diagnosis. Emotionally, though, you come to a point where there's, if not acceptance, there's an understanding that, okay, this is happening. And so the second emotional stage is you wash up on the beach and you're out of the exhaustion of being at sea because you've kind of got a bit of a handle on things. The third emotional stage is that you get more capacity. You start to get a little more understanding. You might get, some more support. And I see that stage as you start to get a bit of a rhythm of day to day and a little more hope. And I call that moving through the forest. So you've kind of got more of this space around you and you're starting to have a little more confidence about the chronic condition emotionally. And the fourth emotional stage is returning to the village. So you come up over the hill and you return to the village. And in that stage, you start to share the wisdom. And in that stage, you're sort of in your new normal. Now, these are emotional stages. They're not linear. You can flip one flare, you're back at sea. You can be at sea, get great medication or treatment. You can be in the village. You can be in these experiences physically, but emotionally, your creativity can kick in when you're at sea. So there's the beautiful, you may know Sarah Rami, who wrote A Lady's Handbook for her mysterious illness. Sarah wrote that book over 10 years, a line at a time in her head, while she was in the most physically incapacitated state. So she was both at sea and sharing the wisdom with the village emotionally. She would write her music one line at a time, and then when she got capacity, she would be able to write. So her capacity would expand a little and then it would contract again. And so the emotional stage, in the first instance of it, we think of it as related and correlated physically. But actually, once you start to get to know these stages, you can actually be in a robust emotional state, whatever is happening physically. And just to let everybody know, you can go find this map. It's totally free. It's on my website. There's a little video explaining it. There's a little download so you can work out where you are. But I worked this out for myself by just asking myself, what does it feel like here? What does it feel like here? And my psyche would give me an image. And then I built the map to understand how to deal with the emotional stages.
So firstly, I will attach the link to this map. It's you know it's making so much sense to illustrate it in this way because, and I think it's beautiful because it's so hard to simplify
Yeah.
this overwhelming experience that we are sharing. And I think tools like this is exactly what we need. And you mentioned Sarah Ramsey's book. The journey is often fragmented. So
Yes.
people think it's linear, right? People come to me after my talks and say, "Wow, like so got sick, and then you decided to get better, and then you got like
Well
it's
done. Good on you. Sort of as if
yeah,
this was all designed this way.
it's beautiful for storytelling, but and in the first years, I would tell the story as is because I didn't want to disappoint people. I didn't want to kind of
Yeah.
uh, uh, discourage people from
Yeah.
embarking on their journey. But the reality is that you have relapses, and you're thrown to sea, and there are storms. It's
Yeah.
not always calm and relaxed out there.
No, and I think what we need to be is equipped for the experience because we live in we're a biological being. I've had the privilege of aging. I was never expected to live this long. And so there's all new challenges with that. It's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do in my 50s and 60s? I never expected to be here. Um, but I have the privilege of watching my body go through the experience of aging, which is what most people will go through in the experience of when they come into a relationship with limitations in their body. I just had a preview of that in some very extreme experiences. And then as I recovered from the liver condition in terms of we got medication that worked for me and my body, then going into perimenopause, just in that stage of life, I got a whole new chronic condition, which I still live with as well. And that was, a vertigo condition, vertigo 24/7, way back at sea, back in bed for, months and months at a time. And these ways of being with ourselves, like the number one experience in a chronic condition that we all try to outrun, and I'm all for giving it a go. If you can outrun it, I'm all for it. Go for it. My experience is that there comes a point where you cannot outrun the fact that you are with yourself, often for long periods of time. And so that can turn inwards and eat at you. That can be high criticism. That can be, I haven't done the right thing, or how am I going to get well? Just so much fuel for eating away at yourself. The alternative is the question that I like to stay with for myself. And that is, how can I use this experience to be closer to myself or to be more empowered. And the number one thing for me in that is the first thing you end up with is faced with compassion, which none of us want to do. None of us want to have self compassion. It's hard work. And so the question I have then is when I can't have compassion and I'm not getting what I want and I'm in these experiences and I've got the frustration, my number one question is, can I have compassion for myself that I can't have compassion for myself? And usually I can exhale and go, okay, yeah, I really understand why I can't have compassion for myself. And that will lead me into relationship with myself. It gives me a doorway into being okay with exactly where I am.
This is a very important point because I think that there is frustration, of course, but I think there is this self-anger, kind of the betrayal of the body,
Yeah.
the loss of youth, right?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with those very strong emotions that comes up often?
So, me, those questions and the lost opportunity and what's going to happen with my life and how am I going to, what is my life and the irritation and the envy and the jealousy at everybody else going along with theirs. So, in that process for me, I was like, I just want to be connected with my own depth. And this is a place that I can go to. And so, one of the things that I did was I read mythology and I watched an enormous amount of Carl Jung. And for me, what I went to was the great feminine myths because I was interested in mythology. It was one thing I could do with my time, particularly when there was a time where I wasn't sure if I was going to live or not, and we weren't sure whether medication would work. So I thought I can't go traveling. I can't, climb a ladder corporately, but I'd really like to read the Iliad. So I'm going to read that. And so I would make a goal that fitted my circumstance as a life experience. And that gave me a sense of just fueling myself gently. And I'm, one of the very few people in my friends group who's read the Iliad, but I know all about it. And that led me deeper into ancient feminine myths. And the only stories we really tell in our culture are stories of virtue and triumph, which is why we're also irritated with diseases
Right.
that get overcome because there's this whole triumph narrative and it really pisses you off if you've got a chronic condition. However, in mythology and the ancient way of telling stories, these were not stories of great triumph. Yes, there was triumph, but there was always a dragon. There was always another adventure. And those are stories about the inner journey of power and psyche. They're not stories about moving in the world. They're actually stories about how you psychologically develop as a human and what you face internally with your.
So basically, you're saying that the side quests have sometimes even more meaning than this Odyssey as a whole.
Yeah, I think that I really know myself and I can really be with myself in any of my states. I can be with you in whatever is going on with you because I've learned to be with myself. And there is nothing this world needs more than our capacity to be with what's actually true. Because only when we're with what's true, only when we're with, okay, I am living with chronic illness. I don't know what's going to happen. Of course, I'm going to put energy into treatment and follow the threads and amazing things can happen. New medication changed my life, like it did change it, but it hasn't changed the chronic condition that we still need to monitor very closely, and it could turn like that. But I can be with that because that's actually what life is. It isn't some enormous ongoing progression into happiness. The tyranny of happiness is one of the dragons that we've been sold. And it's something that haunts us, this tyranny of happiness.
If you haven't done it already, I think that you should formulate everything you just said here in a book, somehow to a book, because
I've started, but
that's
I've
good
got a
because
bit on.
That's a lot of wisdom there. You know, it's uh, when I was in the majority of my bedridden years, social media was not there yet, uh,
Yeah,
in terms of,
same.
yeah, like in terms of, I would not say availability because it was starting. There were
Yeah.
Facebook at some points and so on, but it was still very innocent. Like I still have friends who even attended my wedding who I met on Facebook as a random
Yes.
strangers, right?
Yes.
It was very innocent, very encouraging, but I think that this, like you said, this tyranny of happiness is a beautiful term because um, it's been talked about a lot. But this pursuit of perfection and never showing imperfections, it's something that it's actually making our lives as chronically ill people harder, I think. Because you would think that if you're lying in bed and you have this device in your hand that you can connect to the world, you can be
Yes.
inspired. But from my kind of limited observation, I think that actually it makes us feel this giant FOMO that everybody's living a wonderful life and we are stuck in bed or we are stuck at home.
Yeah.
Um, this is very frustrating for a lot of people, and you cannot tell people stop using social media because
No, and I
already.
don't think we're all wired into it now. Like we can have a go and we can have a digital detox. Um, I think what we want to do is curate what we're seeing. And I think this is actually a really important conversation. I think what we want is to be connected with people who resonate with our values and who give nourishing energy to us. And so here's a couple of things. One is social media is how we met. We met on LinkedIn, but it's all social media. Social media is how my clients find and connect with me. Social media, each year I run a summit called the Pajama Interviews. It's so that we talk with people, but who have resonant values. I've met women all over the world, and now I've started to have men in that all over the world. And I curate who I'm in relationship with. We're going to be raw, we're going to tell the truth, but we're not going to sit in the spiral as the only option for life. And that is what can churn you, I think, with chronic illness is it's not about a whole lot of woo woo that makes you feel like anything is possible if you just think the right thing. That's not what it is. It's about being in relationship with people who are sharing content, practical experience about what is possible and the how in ways that actually work for your ambition, for your desire and your body that's possible. And it's very important to, yes, be recognized and validated in the experience you're having, but to be very careful about your energy following a whole lot of moaning and a whole lot of victimization in a way that it's therapeutic to go into what is being felt, and you don't want to get stuck in a cul-de-sac because you want to explore what's there and use that information to then make practical choices for your life. And that's how you want to curate it. And as I'm talking about this curation, we're talking about social media, but this is my life. Like we all want to curate our lives this way because it could be whining, not invalidly about chronic illness, but we don't want to spend the time in the same way that people are mulling over whether the latest shoes fit, or like there's so many things that we as humans can spend our time wasting our energy on spending time in a spiral. And you've got more in you. There is more for you in this world than that.
You know, Michelle, it touches very kind of a sensitive point in me because it took me around 2 years to write my first book, Revolution from My Bed, and it was maybe the hardest thing I've ever done
Yeah.
because I had to dive deeper in back into the abyss, at least
Yes.
emotionally and figuratively. It was not a relapse time,
Yes.
but when you relive those experiences, it's sometimes even harder. in a
It
way,
is.
to reflect on what you lost. And of course, we want to talk about what we gained. But after all this journey and many edited, like, there was a team that edited it and everything, and then you realize that there was something there that was very static still, like the
Yeah.
book is about my journey.
Yeah.
And because I was not brave enough to um, to share wisdom, I resorted into sharing what helped me. But I feel that this writing process still came from within the spiral,
Yeah. I understand. Yeah.
and this is
It's
why
a
my new
processing of the
yeah,
process.
exactly.
Um, but there are emotional stages, and it's sort of like the map. You started to share the wisdom, uh, but you will go round again and gather more, and there will be another return to sharing the wisdom because that's life. That's what your 20s are, that's what your 30s are, that's what your 40s are, that's what your 50s, your 60s, your 70s. Like that is what life is we share from what we have in that moment, and that helps who it's to help, and we connect with who that helps, but it moves forward. There is the beauty of all of us is that we deepen in our wisdom. That's the natural way of things. And there is wisdom, I'm certainly aware. I don't think age is necessarily the marker of wisdom. I can be mentored by somebody in their 20s as powerfully as they might be mentored by me. We're just having honest, authentic relationship about what it is to be human. That's all it is. It's just talking
That's all it
about
is.
human and being messy, and that's what humans are.
I wish we had this conversation a long time ago,
Mm.
because it's a very lonely journey to be the skipper of your own boat there, and especially when you look back, you look behind you, and you see many, many little kayaks and boats
Yeah,
and rafts that are following you and are looking at you in a way that, oh, this guy has triumphed over illness. And
yeah,
I stopped doing those keynotes like 10
yes,
years ago. When I started my speaking career, it was the guy who had a mysterious illness and he found a diagnosis and rehabilitated himself, and now is a world traveler, trotter,
yeah. Sorted.
and
Life is
sorted.
only going to be happy. It's everything is solved for the next
Perfect.
40 or 50 years.
Exactly. And then the reality of life is that you're not kind of landing softly with this kayak on the boat. I
Yeah,
crashed uh, into the shore, into those rugged, uh, uh, um,
yeah.
like uh, it was it was harder than falling ill in the
Yes.
first place.
Yes. Yes. Because of the story. This is the story of illness. It's like, well, then if I get better, that's it. I've triumphed and will be well. And then because we have such a rubbish story about being ill, we're terrified of the relapse as well.
Yeah,
And that haunts us rather than bodies break down. This is part of the experience. My capacity will expand and contract, and I know what to do when I'm out at sea. I've got my tools. I know what to do here. I know what that time is for. And then I'm less afraid of being there.
it's like the British government is publishing every few years like this ship captain's manual for emergencies.
Yeah.
And I have a background in emergency medicine, so it's really interesting for me to see how can you take all this knowledge and put it in such structured, beautiful, illustrated way. And I wish we had our own manual,
Yeah.
because I think that this is more realistic to look at it as a journey that you have side quests and you have some setbacks, but when you look at it in a very linear way, it's very easy that this linear line is more likely to become this loop in a roller coaster. Uh, and
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of, because it's very interesting uh, uh, to hear about your views about it, and I want to hear about how do you channel it to support the women that you work with because you're doing something quite unique in our realm of patient
Yes.
empowerment.
Yeah. So what I found is that I I mean my illnesses became public in terms of my capacity. I was, at the office and then I was gone. Like there was like quite dramatic in that process. But people watch me come back and I return to work 5 hours a week spread over 3 days. So it had a public process. But I was very clear about navigating it for myself in what I call my sovereignty. And then what happened is people would come and disclose. So I would be at the photocopier, or, before we all worked from home, I ended up working remotely for a decade and negotiated all of that. But people would come and disclose. And so what I learned was I never set out to be in the chronic illness industry, which it is now. It is emerging into an industry because we're all starting to be in our power through it. But people would come and ask me how I did it. And so I would teach them. And over time, I have systematized that so that it's much easier for people to come and find what they need. And so there are self paced programs that I have on the website. The map is all available, the emotional map's free. And then you can take a digital program. And then what I learned through word of mouth, people kept coming, is that career was the hardest thing in capacity. And I knew that because that's where I'd learned everything. And I was so passionate about us having a different world in which we work in ways that work for our body. That's the number one thing. And so I designed programs. Our next round for the last one for this year will run starting the 29th of July. And as I designed that, I again designed a map for your career. And one of the things about that is we often think of the time in bed as there's either you're in your career or it's over. When in fact, I feel like you're off ramp from your career into bed or being at home. And then slowly you might on ramp back into your career. But that time off ramp is usually the time where you're sifting and sorting what's important to you in your life. And that deeply informs the other stages of your career. And so when I thought about this program, I'm very intuitively driven. And so the word that kept coming to me was elation. And I was like, I cannot call a career program for people with chronic illness elation. That is just really not on. And so I was with myself saying, why is it that that's the word? And the reason is because when you can do things in ways that work for you and your body, the feeling is elation. That actually is the feeling. When you can work again, even at 5 hours a week when you haven't been able to, the milestone is elation. And so that's what I've done is just take what I've learned. And I have this unique skill to be able to design a map and a process. And I'm not teaching you a formula. I'm always pointing you back to your sovereignty, your wisdom, what works for you, so that you can work and curate your path forward. This is not think this, do this, eat this, dream this, and stop doing this. That's not what it is. This is your power, and this is actually bringing you into a relationship with your power. And I teach you the tools for how to get to that for you.
This is really, really insightful because this one size fits all, it's really not working in any field, I think, but especially with chronic illness. You're working with a lot of career women who are, being CEOs or leaders in their communities, and it's sometimes twice as hard to deal with those both self-judgment and the work environment
Absolutely.
judgments. So I think sometimes when I speak to people like you, I feel that um, even myself, I fell into this. uh, linear advice or wisdom sharing trap, because sometimes I'm writing stuff like, you should do this, and then I feel, firstly, who am I to say you should do something? And second of all, this advice probably is not going to fit everybody in every stage. And this is why I think that this facilitation or more coaching base and custom made is much more fitting people that are in this constant dynamic journey, right? And I myself, I'm shifting into more of just being honest and vulnerable and sharing my experiences instead of telling what to do. And I wanted to say that really the reason that I was kind of forced into giving advice in my first book was because um, neither nor I or the team working with me were brave enough to just have a raw story. It
Yeah.
had to be this non-fiction, it's another
Yes.
shablon. Okay, like, yeah, now
Yeah.
you shared your story in this American fashion of you share it for a few chapters, and now you have to. We say in Hebrew, I'm Jewish, that the rabbi is standing in the synagogue stage and he is preaching the Bible. Yeah,
Yeah.
now it's your time to preach. And I like your approach that you're not a preacher, you're more a facilitator.
Yeah, I think that we're at a time in the lives that we live, at a time in history where it's really important to be connected to the wisdom of what it is to be human. And it's a very messy endeavor to be human. And there's a lot of critique in our culture about just what is normal human experience. Feeling anxious, normal human experience, amplified by a culture. Yes, absolutely. But it's all turned into this way in which we critique ourselves as if there's something else. There's nothing to critique. You're just being human in an experience of what it is to do that. Now, are there things that help you emotionally and mentally? Absolutely. That's the wisdom that is also within humans. And what you're talking about in this give an answer is we're trained to think, I have a problem, just work out the answer and things will be solved forever. If there's ever a myth, that's the myth. Like, this is the most, like, that is the product of advertising. And we have all swallowed that. It's like, solve one thing, guess what? Another thing's going to arise. It's not about having it all solved. It's actually about how do you as a human work with your process of solving and work with the things that are unsolvable. That's it. It's as simple as that. That's the mystery of living. You are in a mystery. You are a mystery to yourself. Chronic illness is a tremendous mystery. And this world needs nothing more than your authenticity to be having the truth of that conversation. That is what would actually change a lot of what is going on.
Michelle, this is something that I really want to point out to that um, it's extremely rare for me. And we are talking to hundreds of people in a year. To hear somebody who's not trying to put the right answer in front of people.
Yeah.
Um, and if I can share one thing from my journey
Yeah.
for people to learn, is that the actual process of writing a book, which is basically a journal,
Yes.
that was a therapeutic one. That was the
Yes.
tough observation. That was the diving into the abyss and climbing back up. And I think that what happened to me in my writing process and in my speaking process and in my podcasting process is similar to this clash of expectations that we have from society and our authentic self. My authentic self ended the book with this realization that basically I'm suffering also from post trauma, and I went
Yeah.
on and diagnosed it and treated it. But then, when I finished it, I felt that I'm not enough. This is not enough. who am
Yes.
I to write my own story? And this is not about writing a book. It's like, I'm not writing my own story. I'm kind of, there is this huge fabric of stories, and I'm kind of weaving my story inside. And I think that that was the thing that contributed a lot to my later relapse, because when I wrote this book, despite the fact that it was the midst of COVID, I was the
Yeah.
healthiest I've ever been probably in my life
Yeah.
and the happiest. Um, and what let me down eventually, of course, there was re-traumatization and a
Yeah.
virus on the way, but eventually those self-doubts that what you're doing is not enough, nor like to yourself or for other people. And I think that what you're doing is to kind of saying it's okay. It's really okay to be you, kind of.
Yeah, I think that we are plagued in our culture by that's what advertising is. It says you're not enough. Intellectually, we know that, but we are not tracking the emotional impact. We all feel not enough. That's part
Yeah.
of the human condition.
Yeah.
That's actually what connects us is the feeling that we feel we're not enough. And then we're sold this idea of, well, just sort that out. Just do this, whether it's think this, drink kale juice, go to the gym. I mean, so have a war, sort out what that is, have a power dynamic, be more important than others, be less important than others. Somehow all of that will make you okay and enough. And the reality is, we're messy. We're going to feel not enough. And in that, that is exactly what makes us enough. But that is a muscle. Like, that's not something you just think. That's a muscle. That is something I have to lift every day with myself. It is a way in which we strengthen our own capacity to be in what I genuinely call sovereignty. Sovereignty means self referenced power. That's actually what it means. My power, I reference myself. I don't wire it out through everybody else to work out whether or not it's okay for me to have power in this situation. I start with, if I'm not feeling powerful, I start with, okay, what's going on inside? Where do I rebalance this? Of course, there are power dynamics. Of course, there are horrendously traumatic situations. And many of us don't live in those circumstances. And because we don't live in that, we really need to stand up and be accountable for the power we do have. And it has to start with our relationship with self. And I'll leave you with this one sort of piece around this. This is why we're all interested in authenticity. When you are deeply connected to you, you are very hard to manipulate and almost impossible to control because you are referencing you first, not in a selfish way, but in an actual, I'm grounded in me and I'm going to be grounded in me and see what I think of the rocking and rolling rather than just taking it all in and rocking and rolling.
I'm going to challenge you there because, like, I'm using a lot of metaphors when I write and speak, and it's kind of facing the winds,
Yeah.
um, what you're mentioning, because eventually the wind will come, and if you're a
Yes.
deep-rooted tree, you will swing a bit, you'll lose some
Yes.
leaves, but you will not be taking apart.
Yes.
Um, and I want to challenge you with the thought that I have that illness often catches us, especially autoimmune, in those very vulnerable ages
It
of
does.
late teenhood or early kind of maturity. And my question is, when we are facing this in those delicate ages, do we have enough tools to mitigate it to a point that it's not taking us all the way into bedriddeness?
Absolutely.
Because, and I'm not dissing the fact that people are very sick. I'm just saying that you can see people with the
100%.
same level of illness that are less functioning and more functioning.
Yeah. And I think you raise a great point. Um, we don't feel this way, and illness can sort of sweep us off our feet. The skill that you learn through illness is you will get boundaries through illness. Like you have to get boundaries for survival. You might take 5 years to get them, but you will get them sooner or later because the illness itself gives you no choice. You only have so much energy, and you have to learn to say no, and you will learn to say no one way or another. And I agree with you. Having been a teen, in quite an extreme situation in my family, I knew that I didn't have the power to leave home at that point in time. That wasn't part of the choice that I had. But I did have the power internally to know that I could make it through the experience and I could leave at 17. And there is wisdom in all of us at any age. We just don't live in a culture of cultivating wisdom and seeing that as the purpose of living. We live in a culture that, in fact, will teach you to disassociate and give up your connection with yourself as if having power is somehow hooked into somebody else's approval. In a child and teen state, you are dependent on the environment. There's no question. And your brain is still developing. And you will still go through a process in that where you will be also developing your own power. It may not be matured, absolutely. But some of this conversation about the emotional map and finding those ways and what happens at those stages can help you find your way into maturity.
This is super insightful. I'm just sitting here waiting for your book to be written so I can learn from it. I think it's really missing. You're from Australia. I'm originally from Israel, and um, in our countries there is also other cultural ways to tell a story. And
Yeah.
I think that the what's available out there in terms of advice or support, it's a lot of time this like I love my American friends, but and family who lives there, but this American nonfiction way of telling a story, and it's a lot of time triumph based, and it's a lot of time this like I'm gonna slay the dragon. There are not like 100 dragons on the way, and I think this is something that really is contributing to people who are already empowered enough to embark on a journey, but then they're exposed to these materials out there, whatever they be, that tells them that you're not enough. Basically, what you're doing is not enough until you did this.
Yeah. And look, just coming back from the US, and this is something you and I share of that digital nomading experience. And as I said, the majority of my clients are based in the US. My experience is that humans are hungry for actual raw truth and what is real everywhere, and no more so than in the US. Most people I speak to and meet know that the system is dismantling and destabilizing them at a very core level. And it is, when I'm talking about navigating your career with chronic illness, I am talking about it mostly in an American culture, which has the worst corporate culture for navigating illness. Like it's just um, is horrifying to an outsider, and it's horrifying to the people living in it. However, I also see that these tools will teach you how to navigate that, and that's certainly my experience. That what if all of us need is this connection to power, even in a culture that tells you your only power is triumph. It's a lie. You know it's a lie. We know it's a lie. And you can get caught up in that, but you just need to consume and feast on things that nourish you and really understand that your knowledge that it is not right in America. There are some incredibly abundant, powerful things about American culture. And there are some, the health system is very, very, very difficult. And no amount of thinking yourself positively is going to wish away a $35,000 emergency department bill. So there are other resources required in that process. That's just true. Like that's just true. And how do we move then in that experience? And that's really about what can we do in our own lives and where can we influence what's important to us. And one of the primary things in a US culture is to understand those clinicians are your advisors. There's a huge culture around clinicians in the US. Yes, in other countries, but in the US, and that in itself, they are your advisors. You are the decision
And I
maker.
think that this is probably the best note to end this beautiful hour before we're moving to the last question, because you are the decision maker, and I think this is our role as people who are trying to empower other people, that eventually to help bring them to this decision that they are the decision makers and they have abundance of advisors around them and service provider. I don't like to call it service, but it's so abundant out there. You're like you're in a forest and there's so many fruits to pick. Like you'll never go hungry. And
Yeah. And you need the tools. We're not saying it's just about it's okay and
yeah,
it's all up to you and just sort it out and see yourself as an advisor. There's tools to build
yeah,
emotionally to hold that position. Um, and that's what you and I have learned in our own experience is how to cultivate some of the tools. And that's what we're sharing.
absolutely. And I'm also trying to bring my kind of notion of the voices I've listened to and heard over the years to decision makers. And I think
Yeah.
the good news is that they're starting to listen, because
Yeah.
eventually they are affected by chronic illness themselves and their families. And also there is more openness for this rawness and vulnerability. And regarding to what you've said before about the American culture, I think that what really helps me in speaking to people from American culture or North American culture or you know what, in cultures in general, is that I speak uncomfortable truth and I'm very authentic. I'm never insulting anybody, but I think that this is something that is uh, helping to changing the narrative, because if you speak only corporate language, you will never progress anywhere. Um, and that leads me to the final part of our episode today. That has been extremely insightful for me. And usually I like to ask my guests to ask me anything they want, and we haven't prepared it, so I have no idea what's coming. I can't
So
wait.
I'd like to ask you what mystery are you living in the moment in your life?
Wow, this is incredible. It's like every recording is just gets tougher and better. Like, thank you. What mystery am I living at the moment in my life? Um, I'm baffled by a process that doctors call somatization, um, which is basically that our thoughts can create symptoms. And because I have POTS syndrome, which is a type of dysautonomia, so my autonomic nervous system is completely disrupted. When you combine it with PTSD and you combine it with some sort of somatization, it's really the worst vile cocktail that you can ever taste. It's really not a good combination. And I'm baffled by this mystery that every time I get frustrated or disappointed or any strong emotion that comes in, immediately I have very strong physical symptoms. And I must say that I've been ill for 20 years, but it's never been that bad before, and I don't understand why.
Yeah. And that's the mystery you're currently living in with the physical health. And it also sounds to me like it's a mystery about life. There's something about what is life now with this experience.
Thank you for asking this. This is very interesting to reflect about what is life with this experience. Michelle, it's been incredible. I just love to meet people. You see these personas on LinkedIn, and everybody seems like larger than life, but eventually we are all good people who are trying to help other people and help ourselves. And this is why I started this little project to talk eye to eye level with people like you, and just to learn what's out there. We are in this village sharing knowledge. Thank you so much for, firstly, the work that you're doing, and secondly, for taking the time this late you see, I'm very lit because I'm in Austria and you're in Australia. This late in the day, you see the darkness through your
The
window.
dark.
Thank But technology is enabling us to do this amazing kind of far-seeing, and I will add the link to your program and
Sure.
to your chart in the description of this podcast. Thank you so much, and um, I wish for us to collaborate more and have lovely conversation in the future.
Thank you very, very much for both the work that you do, and I've followed you on LinkedIn for quite a while, and it's fun. It's fun to see other people.
It's
It's
fun.
fun to be like, oh, look, we're all out here doing something, and for inviting me and having me on. It's my absolute pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much, and have a good night there in Australia.
Thank you. Take care.